Hi, my darlings. I'm Sophie Darling, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're reacting to episode 10 of series 2 of Apothecary Diaries. That was a mouthful. Jeez. Sorry if I kind of stumbled over my words there, trying to get it all out in one take. It's really difficult sometimes. I don't know how many times I mess up a sentence before I finally get it right, but it's a lot. And that's why editing takes me so long because when you're speaking off the top of your head, especially if you're me, my mouth acts faster than my brain. So I end up like flubbing my words. I end up like not saying the sentence quickly because I'm speaking before I'm thinking. It's just always something that I've dealt with. So, yeah, if you notice some mistakes or turns of phrases aren't necessarily accurate, it's because my brain hasn't quite caught up to my mouth in the moment. Last episode was an incredibly heart-wrenching one. What we're really seeing take shape is that everybody is a victim to some extent. That never is a justification for being a victimizer in turn towards innocence, but it is showing that no one is innocent in a sense. Everyone has been involved in hurting someone else, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Anshi hurt the Emperor because he hurt her, and what she did towards him isn't justified by any means necessary, especially as it's quite heavily indicated that he has experienced trauma himself. I'm not entirely sure what trauma that is because it's not been confirmed. But if I had to speak from the way I saw him reacting to touch from older women, I would say sexual abuse. I would say that he likely had women a lot older attempting to be intimate with him because of his position as the future emperor, because all his brothers died when he was very young. He was the only one set to inherit, and likely suffered similar advances to what Jinshi had to go through, what Jinshi has dealt with too. And that might also be where she's seeing the similarities between Jinshi and the previous emperor, is that they are both deemed very attractive, very good looking, and both of them have also suffered the unwanted advances of older women. And I think Jinshi also has men attempting to force themselves on him because he has quite feminine features. So I think Anshi recognizing that similarity also emphasizes why she was so protective over Jinshi, because she didn't want Jinshi to end up the same way as the previous emperor because women were throwing themselves at him or touching him. It's why he has lived quite a shielded and sheltered upbringing. But I would say that would also play a role in why the previous Empress Dowager also sought to seek power, and that was to protect her son. But I also think she manipulated and took advantage of her son's mental decline for her own benefit in turn, because the men that are grabbing the previous emperor and dragging him away, they're not being nice, they're not being kind, and they're treating him as if he isn't the emperor. They're treating him as if he's something that can be disposed of at will. It's not as if he is a man of power and privilege. And he's terrified of them, and he's terrified of his mother as well. We also know that that scene takes place after his mental decline at the hands of Anshi. We know that after Anshi does what she does, because I have to be very careful with what I'm saying, because I don't want YouTube to take this video down or limit this video or ban this video. So I have to be quite careful with how I word things. But we know after that, the Emperor was never the same, and he locked himself away and he painted. He wasn't the same person that he was. So even though she didn't curse him, her actions still had this negative impact on him. They broke him entirely because that trauma resurfaced. And it seems very interesting as well that when he sealed himself away, he no longer engaged with younger girls. The younger girls were left sort of unscathed. So his mental decline is absolutely horrendous, but the positive aspect is that the younger girls were allowed to remain innocent and untouched. But that still doesn't justify the situation. It doesn't justify what Anshi did to him, doesn't justify bringing out his own trauma again. But what we have to remember, and very similar to my previous discussion when it comes to serial killers and the psychology there, is that we can recognize the situation that they have been thrust into. We can recognize the trauma and we can recognize that this has had an impact on them as a person and has culminated in them becoming who they are today. But they still actively make the choice to harm others because there are people that have gone through significant trauma, significant abuse, who do not go on to abuse others. So that's the thing that we have to distinguish here, is that it's a choice. The emperor went through something horrific and he is a victim of that. But he in turn made the choice to victimize others. Rather than seeking help, rather than trying to get over this fear, he sought out young girls and he made that choice to seek out young girls. So he is not innocent by any means. He is a victim, but he's also a victimizer. In the same way that Anshi is also a victim, but is also a victimizer based on what she did to the emperor. She is not innocent of that. She was innocent as a child. She was groomed and manipulated by the adults in her life, but she is not innocent either in going on to inflict that trauma and harm on the previous emperor. So everyone is a victim, but nobody is entirely innocent, wholly innocent. Everyone has suffered. But it's what you go on to do with your life that makes the difference. Jinshi has suffered, but Jinshi has chosen to help and be kind and caring to others. Anshi knows that what she did was wrong, but has sought a way to redeem herself through banning the castration of men, through banning slavery, setting up that clinic that's not an official clinic but offers a safe refuge for women, especially women that are close to retiring. So she is seeking ways to redeem herself. She is making the choice to atone for the mistake that she made. And part of the mistake that she made is in loving Jinshi, in raising Jinshi, and choosing to give the child that she couldn't love away, because I think she has to have known that the babies were swapped. None of this could have happened if she wasn't aware of it. I think her language is supposed to make us think that she doesn't know, but I think she has to have known. There's no way this could have been done without her knowing. But my point still stands, is that there are characters that have gone through significant trauma. Mao Mao herself, she went through something horrendous and traumatic, and she also did not in turn abuse and harm others. So we can recognize the trauma, but we can look at the way in which characters allow that trauma to define them, in terms of they use it as an excuse for their harm towards others. And you have those that are actively making the choice to be better than those that harm them. So like Anshi, Jinshi, Mao Mao, pretty much everyone bar the previous emperor. It's a choice. And you have to actively work on yourself to ensure that you don't bring harm to others. But yes, and we also had that interesting dialogue that there was a daughter born that wasn't claimed, but was sent away with the doctor that was blamed as the father, but it likely wasn't the doctor and it likely was the previous emperor. And we also then had a character come in series one that was plotting to take out Jinshi, but also to target the Emperor by taking out Jinshi, because as far as they knew, Jinshi was just the heir. They didn't know Jinshi the eunuch is the heir, but they know that the heir was performing that ceremony. So they're targeting the Emperor directly. And then also this whole underlying plot of trying to ensure that the consorts don't have children by increasing the access to oil and fragrances that could be potentially harmful. And then we have the makeup from the previous episode. So this is a big underlying plot that's targeted at the dynasty as a whole in getting rid of this dynasty. So I think we're probably going to see a war. We're going to see a conflict at some point where the emperor is going to have to show the might and strength of his dynasty and to root out the traitors, who I think will probably raise an army against him. If they aren't successful in assassinating him, that will be their next ploy, is raising an army and directly challenging him for the throne, because this dynasty has been ongoing for a long time. It's been a silent takeover with the children having this genetic color blindness, but if they don't, then the concubines that lead them through do. So this bloodline has been the foundation of this dynasty for centuries, to the point that it's become a myth. It's not even seen as a real story anymore. There's no mention of the father. The mother royal was seen as having a child from the gods. It's become so rooted in myth and this idea of divine right that it would make sense that if there are those that were previously inhabitants, previous rulers that were maybe subsumed in the mother royal and her bid for power and control, because her son becomes an emperor. You can't become an emperor without an empire. So it implies that certain clans were maybe in positions of power and then were subdued to serve. It would make sense if there are families then that would want to rise up and establish their power and control once more, or maybe feel that they have more of a direct right to rule because of their long history in this country, whereas the mother royal was a foreigner, she was an outsider. But because of this mythologizing, she likely is seen as being one with the land at this point. But I think the mythology still says that she came from the West. She wasn't native to the country, but regardless, it makes you wonder if that's how they could be rising up. But I also think it has to do with this daughter that was cast out and potentially the ramifications of that. Maybe the stigma and the loss of favor that may have happened as a result. Because if you think about it, the mother was a mid-ranking concubine, meaning she's probably from a noble family. If this daughter is seen as having betrayed the emperor, even though the baby is the emperor's, then the whole family is going to suffer the consequences of that. There's going to be a stigma attached to that family. And we know that reputation matters, and we know that reputation is important, especially when it comes to the concubines and their position at court. But it has a knock-on impact of their family losing favor, losing power, losing privilege. So what if this family loses power and privilege, and the daughter that was born that was then sent away and was likely raised by the mother's family because the mother had to stay, made her aware of that, in terms of blamed her, and she internalized that and passed it on to her daughter. And maybe her daughter is the one that we saw in series 1, whose name eludes me right now, but was just as knowledgeable as Mama when it comes to plants. And it makes sense if she has a grandfather that was a doctor, because Mama was raised by Lumen, who was a doctor. So it makes sense that the two people that know the most about plants have doctors in the family. So it's not really a coincidence. But what if she's been raised to harbor this hatred and resentment towards the emperor's family because of what they did to her grandmother and her mother and her family by extension, because of the loss of power and privilege that was a consequence of the stigma attached to her grandmother? And she's been subsumed into this larger plot of seeking vengeance, of seeking revenge. Even though the previous emperor is already dead, they likely still want to overthrow the emperor to put their family on the throne, because they technically have a connection through the granddaughter. She is a daughter of a princess that wasn't claimed, so technically is illegitimate, but they have royal blood in the family to be able to challenge the emperor and his dynasty by putting this granddaughter in a position where she could inherit, but likely inherit through marriage, and they become emperor, and the dynasty would still be established within that family, within that clan, because the granddaughter would have royal blood. She would still be in line if there is no one to succeed. She would be able to inherit so long as she marries. She couldn't directly inherit, it would be her husband that would have to inherit. But if she was the only one, it would make sense. But they would have to overthrow the old dynasty and make that old dynasty non-existent anymore, because you have Lingley. Lingley could inherit, but they would have to get rid of the entire dynasty because she's not technically legitimized. Because if she is the daughter of this banished princess, she's not legitimate, but it would make sense as to why they're rallying around her, why they're using her, because they want to overthrow and put themselves in that position where they can't be challenged because they have a connection to the Mother Royal and the bloodline, potentially. But I think she has to be the daughter of the banished princess because it just makes sense in terms of the narrative direction, why she would feel so strongly about assassinating the emperor, why she's so heavily involved, potentially why she has the backing of other people who are keeping her hidden. And we know she's alive, but we haven't seen her since. So, she has to have rich, influential family that are willing to take the risk of this, that aren't likely to get caught, because her knowledge of medicine and then the mention that she was adopted by a doctor makes it seem like she has to be, because it's just too much of a coincidence that she was also raised by a doctor. Mao was raised by a doctor. Makes sense that her knowledge would help her in the palace. I don't know. I think she has to be the daughter of the banished princess, but how it ties in with everything else, I'm not entirely sure, because I still think Lolan's dad is involved in this, and I think Lolan is too. But as to how that connects, I don't know. But how it connects to Suri, I think that's how you say her name. I'm not entirely sure. If they're maybe the same family, I don't know. But then that would make sense. What if, oh my god, what if Lolan is his daughter, but also Suri's his daughter as well? He's put one daughter in a position of being a consort to the emperor to get close enough to him to try and assassinate him, whilst the other is trying to assassinate the heir in the background as a court lady, as a servant. He's fully infiltrated with two daughters, but one that can pose as a common servant and one that can pose as a consort, because one is claimed and one is not. Is one maybe illegitimate or from a previous marriage? Because Suri and Lolan don't look alike, so maybe they don't have the same mum. And Suri looks older, so Suri could be a previous marriage from Lolan's dad, because Lolan's dad's quite old. But there is an age gap between Suri and Lolan. So if he had married Lolan's mom, who's the banished princess, and they had Suri, he could see Suri as a way of getting power and having authority to claim the throne, because he has a daughter of the royal bloodline. Even though she's not legitimized, he has a daughter of the royal bloodline. And then he has another daughter that he's placed as consort in order to get close enough to the emperor to assassinate him, because the only people that can get close enough to him is the consorts. Oh my god, that's how it would all connect, is if they're both his daughters. Not just Lolan, but Suri as well. Oh, we're on to something. I think we're on to something. But I've rambled and I'm going to get into episode 10, because these episodes are getting longer and longer. I've realized that each episode is now like 40 minutes or more, because there's so much to discuss. There's so many little threads to try and follow. But without further ado, let's get into episode 10.
三姉妹なの白雨です 虚空です。石油です。
Are they
よ
triplets?
く似た姉妹だな。
How are we supposed to tell the difference?
みんな同郷で顔なじみなの。長女の白空さんは玉葉様と同い年よ。
Okay, so they're not
同
triplets.
郷の人間だけで固めるのか。
Can I just say, the show doesn't like to make things easy, does it? It literally throws in so many characters that look alike. We have the cousins that look identical, Isla and Eileen. We have these three sisters that are being introduced, and we're like, right, okay, how are we supposed to tell the difference between all three of them? Then we have Lolan and this servant girl. I think this whole idea of duplicit identities and how similar and alike people look is supposed to make us aware that there is like a big plot reveal coming, that there is a character that is masquerading as another character, which has to be Lolan and the servant. The more I see these duplicit characters and how alike they are, and then we had the symbolism of the mirror in previous episodes, it just makes me all the more certain that the big plot reveal that's going to come up is that Lolan is the servant, that she's masquerading as the servant, that not everything is as it appears to be, because we're seeing so many identical characters who all behave and act differently. So I think it's meant to say, you know, appearances can be deceiving. That what we see is not necessarily what we get. That Lolan as the consort is not the true Lolan. The true Lolan is the servant. That is her true personality. But the consort Lolan is this act that she puts on to please her dad, but isn't always her because she has other people pretending to be her while she goes out and plays the serving girl, where she gets to be her true identity, her true self. It's just, yeah, it's very on the nose. It's very on the nose, thematically and symbolically.
かかったことのある玉葉様にはその方が安心だな。毒味役のマオマオです。虚空様。
私は虚空じゃないわ。
あれ、じゃあ石油様。
I'm confused too.
白空よ。名前と同じ色の髪紐を使う。
Could you not just wear different hairstyles? One has blue eyes, one has like a darker blue eyes, and one has like greenish eyes.
マオマオ、ちゃんと部屋に戻りなさい。
いえ、物置で問題ありません。
Oh, she's refusing.
家に決まってるでしょ。
This is my room.
いや、でも荷物も全部部屋から持ってきましたし。
Oh, she's pissed.
小屋は好きにしていいわよ。
Oh,
寝るときは元の部屋を使ってちょうだいね。
Yokyu's like, you can have it, it's yours.
いい上司たちだな。
Yokyu's very fair and kind.
玉葉様が解任して今以上に人手が必要になる翡翠宮にとって、これは多数の侍女を連れている動乱妃のザクロ宮と釣り合いを取るためでもあるのだろう。
Which is a show of power.
インファさん、マオマオさんは部屋ではなく小屋に住んでいるのですか？本当ですか？玉葉様の次女なのに。いや、
How to explain Mao Mao? You can't really explain Mao Mao to new people. You just have to get along with her.
早く新しい侍女たちに慣れてほしいというインファ様らしい気配りだ。
本当に私に悪いと思って。
Oh?
それは
What does she want?
だよね。じゃあ早速今夜付き合ってもらうわよ。
Where to? Where are you going? Uh-oh.
やられた。
Where to?
今夜の外出、本ニャン様は。
大丈夫よ。許可はもらってるわ。
この辺りは古い建物しか
We
ないは
keep
ず
hearing
だ
about the north side of the palace a lot this series.
ママこれ。こんな感じでかぶって。アンドンは決してこれを代わりに。
綺麗だけど、ずいぶん
What
年のい
is
ったのかな
going on? What are they doing?
ここは先帝の時代に使われていた場所なのよ。昔に比べて女官がだいぶ減ったけど、こういう時にはぴったりよね。
What occasions? What's happening? They're having like a seance or something? Like what are they doing?
こんな暑い日に締め切った部屋に12人
Mama's
も
like,
集まっ
what have you
て
dragged me into? What the fuck's happening?
お話の準備はできていますか。今宵
Oh,
は肝が冷える13の話を楽しみまし
it's
ょ
like a little book club.
夜な夜な北門の堀では身投げを繰り返す下女の姿。哀れに思った女官が堀に花を浮かべる。下女の白い顔が浮かび上がり、女官が慌てて逃げようとすると、突然足をつかまれて、あの日私を突き落としたのは。
Mama's so unfazed. She's like, I've
どっかで
seen
聞いた
worse.
ような
I've dealt
話。
with worse. I feel like all these stories are going to be linked to stuff that's happened in the palace, which would make sense. It's stuff that they know and have seen and heard.
しかしまあ話は高級内の噂程度のもので肝が冷えるほどではない。
Ooh, maybe Mama will hear something that makes her realize the plot is ongoing.
こんばんは。
シス、
食べる？
Shishri? I don't know if I can say her name properly. Shishri? She's here too.
もし入れば呪われて鬼に魂を食われてしまう。でもある時、一人の子供が禁忌を破った。あまりにもお腹が空いた子供は食べ物を求めて森へと入った。いいこと教えてあげる。あの森にはたくさん食べ物があるよ。けれど森に入ったことが村人たちに知られて、親子は村八分になった。孤立した親子は食べるものもなく、
Oh,
痩
that's
せ衰えて
awful.
いったけれど、
But it's the power of superstition.
ある夜のこと、親子の家にゆらゆらと光が入っていくのを見た者がいた。子供はすでに死に、母親も亡くなる寸前。ねえ、いいこと教えてあげる。そこまで言って母親は死んだ。その死に顔は不気味に笑っていたの。破った者の家には鬼が現れ、魂を食われるという。
Definitely wasn't a demon.
なんか眠い。狭いところに大人数だし少し人酔いしたかな。
She says she's dizzy. Is it the heat or why?
辺りはススキだらけの平原で、どうやら野犬の群れもいる様子。
I wonder if the jangling on their staff is designed to scare off the spirits.
納屋の隅で構いませんので、一晩泊めていただけませんか。
妻は僧をもてなし、寝床まで用意してくれた。心を尽くしたもてなしに、何も持ち合わせておらぬ僧は、せめてものお礼にと経をあげることにした。
鈴の音か。いや、鈴の音に聞こえるが、これは人の声か。
そんなんじゃダメだよ、あんた。私は一人になりたくないんだ。
じゃあどうするつもりだ。
What was he planning to do? What was her husband planning to do?
さあ、やるよ。どこだ、あの僧は。
見えたのか。
Whoa, what the fuck?
いないよ。
オール
What the hell?
熟音が聞こえなくなるまで経を唱え続けた。若い夫婦の姿はなく、そこには虫の羽が落ちていた。
話し方がうまいな。まるで別人みたいだ。
What the fuck was that?
この横顔なんか見覚えがあるような。
Because it's Lowland. Because it is. It has to be.
墓地に人玉が出るという噂が立ちました。いかにも怪しいと勇敢な若者たちが正体を探りに行きました。同じ町に住む男が松明を片手に歩いていただけでした。
Is that the end of the story?
男の正
She
体は
doesn't
墓
deal
荒ら
with
しで
superstition. She deals with fact.
墓地を掘り起こして死体の腹を裂いては難病に効くという人の肝を。以上です。
Mama's like, it's fantasy. I can't deal with that. Oh, Mao Mao.
あるところに男が、いや、老婆だったかな。
She doesn't have a story.
ここに集まったのは12人なのにどういうことだろ
その頃強大な権力を振るっていた女帝である対皇太后が、先帝は年派もいかぬ少女を選んではその花を散らし、倒られた少女たちは外に出ることを許されぬまま時を過ごしました。
Was she one of them?
一人身ごもった少女がおり、先帝に訴えましたが、
Mama knows about this.
も許されず、死ぬ間際に一言、次はお前たちの番だ。
Carbon monoxide poisoning.
ぐったりしている女官を窓や扉の近くへ。消えずに残った火のせいで体に害をなす空気が部屋に充満
I
して
was
いる。
wondering why she was getting dizzy. There's no ventilation.
もう少しだったのに。
Is she gone? What the
う。
fuck?
女官は
なんかバタバタだったわね。主催者の女官もいなくなって。
Did they not realize how close they were all to dying?
禁忌の森なんていうのは迷信でしょうが、禁忌になった言われが全くないとは言い切れないって思って、すると森のものをむやみに食べてはいけないと言われるようになるでしょう。そしてそれは年月を経て禁忌になります。
How rumor and gossip spread.
あの話の親子は不作の年で飢えていました。月夜岳という平たけに
Oh,
似た
that
キノコがあ
has
ります。
bioluminescence.
とても美味しそうですが、毒があって暗くなると光る特徴があるんです。
Oh, it would look like a spirit, like Mama was saying, with the guy with the torch in the graveyard.
いませんが、飢えて体力が落ちた親子が食べたらどうなるか。
It would destroy them. They wouldn't be able to fight it off.
美味しいキノコが森の中にあるよ。
自分たち親子を見捨てた村人への復讐として。
すっきりした。じゃあ私こっちだから。
All these stories are somewhat rooted in truth. So why was the organizer going on about the previous emperor? And why was she wanting to harm those in the room? So strange.
あら、思ったより早かったのね。ちょっとした騒ぎがありまして。
まあやっぱり去年までやっていた女官が亡くなったから、私は
Mm.
誰に引き継いだのか心配だったのよ。結局高級から出られなかったのよね。実は選定のお手つきになったこと
It was
が
her.
唯一の楽しみだったそうなのよ。
That's why she told that story.
なるのもいかがなものかと思っていたから、続けてくれる人がいてよかったわ。
We saw a ghost.
あの女官の話は己の身の上だったのか、それとも事情を知る誰かのいたずらか。世の中よくわからないことは
How
たく
much
さん
is
あるものだ。
coincidence and how much is intentional?
肝が冷える13の話を楽しみましょう。
They were going to be the 13th ghost story. All the court ladies that gathered and died. But why would she disappear? Like, was it intentional? Like, what was the
背
purpose?
筋が凍るどころか寝苦しい夜になったのだった。
She's like, I'm so scared. Hold me, Mama. Oh, Jinshi looks resolute about something. Also, that music. It's as if maybe Jinshi has clocked on to something. I'm not entirely sure. But what the hell was this episode? I feel like everything they talked about was slightly rooted in truth. So I thought maybe the 13th was this ghost lady. So either the woman that's organized it doesn't exist and is actually the previous court lady and they've seen a ghost, which just isn't fathomable. It's just not true. Or she's telling the tale of the previous organizer, or she also is one of the girls that were impacted by the previous emperor and his interest in young girls. But it was very strange. Why would you put them all in harm's way intentionally and then disappear? It's so very strange. And then Mama saying, I'm glad we didn't end up becoming the 13th ghost story, because everything is rooted sort of in personal experience, but also court life. So if all these like ladies in waitings and servants gathered and just randomly died, they would also become the 13th story. They would become a ghost story to tell the next generation. But it's so weird. So she passed away, somebody else has taken over it, and then the story was told about the previous organizer and her relations with the emperor and the situation. And just before she died, she said, "You're next." But they're all playing it off as if it was accidental, as if like they didn't just all nearly die from carbon monoxide poisoning. So strange, so weird. I feel like there's meant to be a sort of deeper hidden meaning here, but it's not quite coming to my mind as to why she would use the story of the previous organizer, unless she also is one of the girls. Because it was said that numerous girls were brought here. The youngest girls were deflowered, and then they spent the rest of their days in the Rear Palace and they weren't ever allowed to leave. So she could be one of them. She took over from the woman that had her daughter taken from her and was never allowed to leave. So it would make sense then that the next organizer would also potentially be someone that was a victim of the previous emperor. Which, what if the unofficial clinic that's been set up and has all these women in it and they're older, what if they're also the victims of the previous emperor and they've been allowed to live there in relative peace and harmony by the Empress Dowager because it's the only way that she can help them? Maybe. Maybe some of them are victims, and because they weren't ever allowed to leave, this was the only sanctuary that they could offer them because they have nowhere else to go, because they've spent all their lives in the Rear Palace since they were young, that they don't know anything else. They don't know where else to go or who else to rely upon. So they have to stay in the palace, and it's the way of keeping them safe and protected because they can't make a life outside of here. That Shushwe, can't say her name, probably butchering it, is Lolan. Is Lolan, because Mau Mau looked at her and went, "Why do I recognize her?" Especially from the angle. It's Lolan, because she's seeing Lolan's eyes like downcast. That's Lolan. So Lolan is also Shishwe. So I'm now on the hill that Lolan's dad has two daughters, which is Shishwe and Suri. But Suri's not from the same mum as Lolan because they don't look alike. So I think they have different mums. If you think about Lolan's dad and his appearance and his features, and then you think about Suri, Suri looks like Lolan's dad more than Lolan looks like her dad. Lolan doesn't really resemble him, but Suri does. So I think he has two daughters. I think he is very much heavily involved in everything that's going on here, and that he's planted both his daughters in an attempt to overthrow this dynasty and take power and control for himself. But now I'm thinking, is this unofficial clinic also full of women that weren't ever allowed to leave? And it was the Empress Dowager's way of ensuring that she could protect these girls even after the previous emperor was gone, because they have nowhere else to go. They have no other life because they have been brought here by the previous Empress Dowager. They were deflowered, they were barred from leaving. But even if they could leave, where would they go? Who would they go and see? They don't have anywhere to go. They have no one to be around because likelihood is that their families are dead or they came from poor, impoverished backgrounds, which meant leaving the security of this environment to go back into something that's uncertain and potentially would harm you even further because you have no economic opportunities. So I think potentially the unofficial clinic is full of girls that were brought here for the previous emperor and were never allowed to leave, and that's become their sanctuary, their place to retire and to live in peace and harmony. And that's why the Empress Dowager set it up to give these girls a chance and an opportunity to be safe from harm and to have some relative peace after the trauma that they've gone through. Potentially. That story with the monk was like the creepiest one where she like devours him, devours her husband, and all that's left behind is insect wings. I feel like there's probably a deeper meaning to it that is just not clicking in my head because all these stories seem to be connected to palace rumor and gossip, but it's not coming to mind right now, other than the fact that the previous organizer just nearly killed them all and then fucking disappeared. Maybe that was part of the ghost stories and she would have opened the windows before it got too serious, but I don't know, it was so strange. And now they're like, was she a ghost? Was she real? Maybe that's part of the illusion. But that was such an interesting, bizarre episode. I think that's all I have to say in relation to this episode, but if you enjoyed this react, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment below to help boost this video into the algorithm. Until next episode, bye!